Well, good morning. How is everybody today? You looking peppy, ready to go? I have to tell you, I've been in your seats, and so I know right now you are tired. You just had breakfast. You're thinking, lady, I'm trying to mark my book up to see where I'm going and figure out where our friends are going. So I know what you're thinking right now. So I promise to be brief, give you a snapshot into the department, and let you know kind of what we're about. Probably the most important part of that introduction is kind of ironic, I know, because I ran on a Republican ticket and I was at the White House with a Democrat Republican, and that always confuses people. Just so you know who I am, for me, this is not about politics. I'm not a huge politically aligned person. For me, education is about, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, or what you are. If you have good ideas, I need your ideas at the table. So that's who I am, and I want to make sure that all of you are very aware of the person driving your state isn't doing it for political purposes. That's just not what I'm about. I'm a mom, and I'm an educator first, and I just happen to hold a political office at this point. I understand how important that political office is. However, again, for me, it's not about politics. For me, it's about the party of students. And so I will always remember that. As you heard in the introduction, I started out at being a special education teacher. And I have to share a quick story with you because only some of you would appreciate that. Some audiences wouldn't appreciate this story. But I was hired in the 11th hour back in the day in the early 90s when it was kind of hard to find a job, not like it is today. So I was in the 11th hour being hired as a special education teacher in a very small rural district in Delaware County, West Del. And so I was going to be the 6th through 8 middle school special education teacher. And so I was excited, ready to go. I had great lesson plans. I thought I was prepared. You know how that goes. You get out of school and you think you have the answers, and at least you have some idea what's happening. So went into the job. It was the first day of class. And some of you who have been in those situations where you've had the child multiple years, you get to know the kid, you get to know the grandma, the grandpa, the brothers, the sisters, the aunts, the uncles. You know the whole shebang, and you know that child really, really well. Well, right out of the gate, I had a 6th grader who I grew to know very well, and then later in life it came full circle because then I had his nephews as like a principal, so I was like, what is happening? But what happened was at the very beginning, I had those lesson plans ready to go, I was ready, and he kept calling me Mrs. New Stuff. And I thought, I know I'm prepared, I have great lesson plans, but I'm pretty sure I'm not Mrs. New Stuff. So I asked him, I said, buddy, where are you getting that? Why are you calling me Mrs. New Stuff? And he said, you're on my schedule. So when I looked at it, like many of you know what's going to happen, when I looked at the schedule, it said new staff. So I thought, okay. So my next look after telling him, oh no, that says new staff, I'm Mrs. McCormick and yada yada, went through that whole story. But I remember looking at my lesson plans thinking, those aren't going to work. Because it was a reality check for me to say who this child was, their ability, and he was a great kid, but really what level we were talking about at that time. So that was my first lesson in that first 30 seconds of teaching that really was a reality check for me. I know your jobs, whether you're a special education or general education or a school psych or a speech path, they're hard. And for people to underassume that or pretend like you're not living in a very complex and difficult profession, to me, is disrespectful. I know your jobs are difficult. I know they are very complex. But I also know, too, that was one of the most rewarding times in my career was teaching special education. Because at times where I thought we are not getting anything accomplished, there were moments where I'm like, we got this. We're doing great. So I know it's a roller coaster ride, but I will say I celebrate everything you do for the students of Indiana. And please know we mean that sincerely, or I would not have ran for the office of State Superintendent. So thank you for everything you do every day in the classroom. I want to talk to you about the Department of Education so you have a snapshot on what is coming. But also I'm going to challenge you. If you're not a participant in this, that's on you. So I want to let you know how you can be a participant. Right now, what we have decided at the department, we look at operational objectives and academic objectives so that you know where we're coming from. Operationally, we are trying really hard to make sure that we are collaborative, which means we have a lot of rebuilding and repairing of relationships to do. And in fact, I've got a really important legislative meeting that you want me there versus here, believe me. But those are the type of relationship, rebuilding and repairing that we are trying to do in order to make sure all of our voices are back at the table. So we're working really hard at that collaboration piece. I understand fully. There are times I do not agree with people that we're trying to partner with, and they don't agree with us. But I will tell you, absence of a voice at that table is dangerous. If you're not at the table, what are they going to do? They're going to eat you for lunch. So we are making sure we are at least at the table. So that is extremely important. So that collaboration piece is big. Communication. Some of you have already seen the change in our communication. We are going back to the days of Sams and Pams, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, that probably ages you. So Sams and Pams will go out. It's at the email system every Friday. If you're not receiving that and you wish to receive it, you can enroll online at the department. So that is not a big secret. All that's doing is streamlining communication into what I call priority information, and all of the stuff, or I hate to say it, that is deemed more fluff. We're trying to put that online on the website so it's still accessible. It's just not bogging down what you guys are trying to look through to prioritize in information coming from the department. So if you want to be a member of that email and you're not receiving it, get online, enroll. The reason why we went back to that system is because we had communication come in 10 different ways, and it was getting very confusing, and half the staff knew about it, others in your district didn't know about it, people were applying for grants they weren't eligible for. It became very, very confusing. So the field told us very clearly, streamline communication. So we have a ways to go. Obviously 37 days into this, we still have a ways to go. But we are working really hard to make sure that communication piece is big. Also with that communication piece, we have a lot of advisory groups going. We need your voice. If you're that person that you're like, you know what, if they would just listen to me, I could tell them how to fix XYZ because I know you're talking about it at lunch. So if you have some answers, we're willing to listen, but we don't know all of you. So if you or your peers or you know of someone that's like that person has really got to be part of that advisory, we need their name, we need their contact information. You can send us an email, you can send it to me directly. I don't care how we get it. Make sure we have that. There's too much going on that the field needs to have their voice in. And if you look at what's happened, I would argue for the last 8 years, that's been absent. So make sure your voice is being heard. Lastly, we want to talk about capacity. We've reorganized the Department of Education. We've gone from a vertical model to horizontal. The reason for that is we knew from the field, they were telling us everything was getting bottlenecked. You weren't getting your grants on time. Nothing was getting approved. You weren't hearing back from people. You would call and get no response. And so instead of a vertical model, we've gone to a horizontal model. We are really mirroring, if you want to look at it, it's online, but we really mirrored New York City because they have more students in their district than we have in our entire state, and their model tends to work. So we went more horizontal to really help with the field. That was our goal. So the operational model, those are the 3 C's that we're working on. Academically, what are we focusing on? We are focusing on academics for all students. So we understand the entire spectrum and the needs are very different. They're different in regions, they're very different in your districts, they're very different in your building and in your classroom. So in order to do that, we are looking at the whole spectrum of student population to say we are here to provide tools and resources and support for all students. That is huge and that is a big commitment from our department. We're looking at 4 main areas, just so you know what's on our radar. The first one being reading. And I know reading gives us all fits. You just want the magic bullet and there isn't any, and it's a lot of hard work. But reading is going to be on our radar. We're looking at research practitioners to bring into the state of Indiana. Currently, we do not have any in the state of Indiana that are on staff at the department. So we're looking at how we can partner with some universities and how we can either hire or contract that out. So not so we are just hoarding those people, so that when you call and say, we're implementing Calkins and we are dying a slow death, help us, we can actually help you. So we are trying to really beef up our tools and resources, but reading will be one of those areas. If you, again, have ideas on how to do that, we will listen. You just need to be a voice and make sure you're communicating that. The second area, if you're paying attention, Indiana has been what I would argue a state of extremism. So we're trying to be a state of reason. So we went the whole stream of all students have to be 4-year college bound. And we had monies tied to that, performance tied to that. You all lived through that. The message was loud and clear. For all of you in this room, sometimes that message and that charge from the state was very, very difficult. And it was hard to figure out how you were going to play that game, do what you need to do as a district, pay attention to your monies. You had a superintendent who was having some words with you. So it's very, very difficult to go extremes. Now, if you're paying attention, the whole conversation is swinging to what's happening in the workforce. So they're telling us in the next 10 years, 1 million jobs will be out there ready to go, and only 80% of those, or 80% of those will require simply a high school diploma or workplace specialist, some type of certification. That is very different from what we were singing the tune of Indiana saying everybody's got to go to a 4-year college, everybody's got to get that degree. Our charge as a department is stay student appropriate. We have to have those kids who have the aptitude and the interest in going to a 4-year plus degreed program. We also have those students who they're not interested and it's not appropriate, but they are going to be successful in their life by taking another avenue, which may lead them back or it may not lead them back to a 4-year type of degree. So what does that look like? So our charge right now at the table is we don't want the state to swing. And if you're watching some bills out there, my concern is we could swing. So we're trying to stay right in the middle to say we need both. We need to make sure we're pushing all students to their academic capacity, but also being very smart and appropriate on what their interests are and what they are capable of doing once they leave us. So that is a very different conversation than what has happened in the last, again, 8 years. So we're trying to say we can't do the extremes. And all of you know that, but to tell the State House that is a hard sell. So that message is what we're trying to do right now. But the CTE, in addition to the IB, AP, dual credit, those high school credit-bearing courses, that's still on our radar. So we're looking at both. The other area, the fourth area is STEM. So I know many of you get nervous when we talk about STEM because that can get kind of a sexy word right now and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For us, STEM means how do we align our resources in a better way to make sure students are getting hands-on experience that is meaningful. So we're trying to streamline the dollars, we're trying to streamline some of the programming, but let you as local folks have say in that. So we're working really hard on STEM. That's another area we need some help with research practitioners. All of you who have lived through the RTI and the math area, it's hard. And if you've got that figured out, you probably need to stand up and cheer from the rooftops. Math RTI is difficult. So again, we need help in that area with math research practitioners. So we're going to obviously focus in on that area as well as part of STEM. So STEM is our fourth area. I want to kind of snapshot and move into legislatively what we're paying attention to. Your lives in this room, you understand the power of the dollar. And I hate to say it, but pay matters across the board in so many things that we do. And to pretend it doesn't is just not reality. So let's talk about funding. If you're paying attention to special ed funding right now, obviously the House budget came out and it looked like a little extra money for our most severe. And that was the only movement that we saw in special education. If you know special education dollars, you know preschool special ed is woefully underfunded and you know some of the other areas of eligibility need some work as well. So we're playing a little, in my opinion, a little game, but we're boosting some areas, but we all know too, we just took a hit in some areas that started this last budget cycle. So we are definitely paying attention to the money part of things, the budget. Along with that we're paying attention to with the finances would be the CTE monies to see what's going to happen to those. We have a lot of students identified in special education who are very successful participants of CTE classes. And I'm not saying just career centers. We're talking the singletons that move through the high schools, your food and nutrition, your adult roles and responsibilities, your personal finance, your global economics. You know the deal. Many of your students who struggle at times to find credits that they can capture do very well in some of those courses. But what we don't want to happen is the money of those courses to go away or be at risk. So we are at the table again for conversations about the money. And again, it's just the reality of it. Assessment and accountability, I know, is a big topic right now, especially with ESSA. As a state, we are going to take advantage of everything we can with assessment. I know alternative assessment and alternative diploma for this group is probably on everybody's radar as far as what are we going to do, what's that going to look like. We're going to re-engage all of you as far as going across the state and making sure we are targeting those conversations. So before it was a listening tour, and honestly, if we had 5 people show up, it was a celebration. We cannot do that as a field, guys. We're getting ready to roll out probably one of the most important plans we've rolled out in the history of education in Indiana because of the flexibility it allows. So when we come to your communities, please do your homework, and it's not just us listening. It's going to be, here's kind of where we can go. We need your feedback on that. But it's going to be more of presenting you with the information, getting your feedback. It'll also be posted online. But you need to be an active participant in that. Many of you have a lot of opinions on the 1% rule with alternative assessment. Many of you have very strong opinions on what we do with diplomas. If your voice is not being heard, your professional organizations do a nice job, but many of you in the trenches have really good feedback that we need to hear. And again, if we're not hearing it, that's on you. We need to hear your voice. I have made it no secret that I like the SAT track for assessment. And before you panic, because I know I had people panic, I will tell you some states have done it very successfully. That doesn't mean that the accountability would be everybody hits college readiness threshold. That's not what that means. A lot of states have scaled it, so there's a whole scale that would be a little more forgiving of the reality of student performance. Many have done it very successfully. Why do I like that? Because I would argue Indiana has not done a good job, and we are not going to do a good job. I find that hard to believe we're all of a sudden going to get really good at making tests, because we're really bad. So I don't want to go down that same track. And you know, you live it with me. And I know you're living it with me right now. Some of you want to, I know Pearson right now is probably not sending me Christmas cards, but that's okay. So for the assessment piece, what we're trying to look at is what's canned that makes sense. So we get the time down, that we have. I know the accommodation piece makes people a little nervous, but other states have figured it out differently with SAT or ACT tracks. But how do we pick something that's a canned program that's been proven for years and backward build into meeting the letter of the law with the most flexibility we can? But yet I just don't think the answer is we just take another test and we field test it for 2 years and we call it a different name. That's not going to work. So the assessment piece is one, when we go out into communities, we will be having that conversation. And I will be honest, we're already starting those conversations with our legislators. We've already brought back Wes Bruce. Some of you may remember Wes Bruce he'd scare you to death if you did something wrong in the test administration. You were going to get hauled off to jail. He's back. And he's great, but he has the beauty of Wes Bruce is he had a little time to get to some other states, and so he's bringing all that wealth of knowledge back to say, how does this work with our special populations? How are other states doing it and doing it well? That too is going to be a hard sell. Guess who can talk to their own legislators? All of you. So make sure that you're being a voice when it gets closer to time to say what's going to work for those special populations. That's going to be critical. The accountability piece. IM1 has never said one grade tells all. With ESSA, we have the flexibility of several grades, like a multifaceted approach. One grade does not tell the story of a school. Through the last 37 days, I've been in some F schools that are pretty darn amazing. And I've been into some A schools, and we were one at Yorktown. We had room to grow, and I'll be the first to admit it. But the grade did not reflect everything happening in that building across the board. So we're looking at a multifaceted approach to look at that. How are we doing in growth? How are we doing in performance? How are we doing in graduation rate? How are we doing in some of those other areas? So I would like to see a multifaceted approach. Is that popular in Indiana with some of the power players? No. But we're going to do what we can do as far as using that flexibility to ESSA, listening to us with the voices so we have the power behind that to say this is what the field is saying will work. Much of the pushback I'm hearing is because parents won't understand what that means. I argue that because you send home a report card, whether it's standard-based or you send home IEP goal progress reports, you send home regular report cards, and parents understand if their child's got an F in reading, most parents know that's not good. If they've got an A in math, they're like, okay, my kid's rocking it in math. I think parents can understand that. So for people to say parents can't understand a multifaceted report card for a district, I think is just a cop-out. Because I think they can understand a multifaceted approach. So the accountability piece is high on our radar. Broadband. Many of you are dealing with issues as far as not access, but capacity. That is huge with testing. That's huge with what you're doing with Indiana IEP. I know you love it when there are issues with that. So I know that broadband is a huge, huge concern for many of us. We've got to fix that before the state says you got to do X, Y, Z and hold us accountable for it. So that is something we're asking for more dollars and have had early success with that. So the broadband is on your department's radar, not just for assessment, but for curriculum and instruction. Remember, we have said from the beginning, Indiana loves to talk about assessment. If they can talk about anything at the State House, it's assessment. So we're trying to broaden that up to say reform does not happen at the State House. Reform does not happen at the White House. Reform happens in your classroom, in your buildings, if it's going to be true reform. So in order to do that, we can't just talk about assessment standalone. We have to have the hard conversations about curriculum, instruction, assessment, and accountability aligned and tied together. And until we do that, we're going to be just a state revolving around reform, around assessment. And that is a dangerous place to be. We've lived that, and obviously we're struggling. So that is not a good place to be. So the broadband piece of that, until we can move the needle for some of you, we know that's an issue, and that will be also something of our focus. Teacher retention and attraction. Yeah, try to find a special ed teacher right now. I know it's hard. Try to find a speech pathologist right now. It's hard. So what we are saying is we need to look at licensing. We've already had a lot of feedback from the field on how to loosen some of that up so we can find folks. And the bottom line is pay matters. You can't expect someone to get in this profession for $36,000 and in 7 years they're making $38,000. It's just not going to work. So pay matters, and I know I was superintendent, and that includes benefits, because as soon as your benefits get cut, that's your pay. I mean, that plays into everything. So pay matters, benefits matter. But also we need to, as a state, be very purposeful in celebrating the profession, not just special education folks, but the entire profession. We're going to work really hard at being purposeful about that. But the conversations that we're having too, right now if you're watching bills, only certain populations of teachers are going to get rewarded financially. Our argument is they just don't show up miraculously at those classes and perform well. You got to backward build because we are a system in education. So you show me a dynamic kindergarten teacher, you show me a dynamic special ed teacher, they're worth every penny. So it just doesn't mean that you show up to an AP course and all of a sudden the child just gets prepared and brilliant. So we're trying to have those conversations as far as backward build. But the teacher retention and attraction piece is a piece that we are really, really obviously concerned about but focused on. For the first time in the history of the department, we brought a chief talent officer. Scott Syverson is in that position, and Dr. Syverson is working really hard with licensing departments and other areas to say what are some of the problems and how do we address them. Oddly enough, if you're watching the news, we have a whole bottleneck of students who are passing their college 4 years and getting through, but they can't pass the licensing test. So if you're watching Channel 13, some of you, or if you're in the Indy area, you're probably well aware of all this. But that's a huge issue. So is it a college preparation issue, or is it a cut score issue, or is it both? And so before we cast stones, what we're doing as a department is taking a look at standard deviation, what's happening to some of those performance, because what we can't afford is we need the teachers. We've got a lot of long-term subs in classrooms. We need the teachers, but they're bottlenecked in some regards. So we are trying to figure out how to address that as well. Lastly, preschool. That is something that is on our radar. Many of you know the power of preschool. But many in here understand too, when I talk about the 0 to 36 month and how just as important that conversation is versus just preschool conversation, you all get that. Because you get developmental, you get the socioeconomics, you get the pieces of their home life that if it's a disaster from 0 to 36, and whatever you're doing when they're 4 years old, it's still hard. That gap is still there. And to close that gap is very difficult. You have those students showing up at kindergarten who are nonverbal, and many of you work really, really hard, but it's really, really difficult to move those students, and that gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but you're working really hard. That goes back to being proactive to say, what's Kentucky doing with 0 to 36 months? What are parts of Chicago doing with the 0 to 36 months? For us to pretend like we're not going to pay for it later, I would rather put the monies up front, be proactive in 0 to 36 in preschool versus serving them when they're incarcerated. So we need to get aggressive in putting the monies up front because we know, you all know, if you've been in education for a while, you can almost identify what's going to happen to a child early on, and you're going to work really hard to try to intervene on that, but it's tough. So that preschool conversation, I understand the power of it. Also, I've been on the record to say, although I do support preschool, I worry about, there's one pot of money. And so if we start all taking from that one pot of money, are we going to have 40 kids sitting in first grade? So that's the other part of the conversation that we cannot not have. We need to have that conversation as well. So in a snapshot, that's where we are as a department. That's who we are as your leadership team. We are there to service you, to provide tools, resources, any support. Again, I know how difficult your jobs are, and I am thankful every day that there are people who are still willing to do it. My husband's a teacher, and every day he reminds me how difficult it is. But that's a good, healthy thing. He teaches science at a high school. So I am well aware that your jobs are very difficult, but please know your Department of Education, we are just that. We are your department. So whatever you need from us, if we're doing something that's not going well, it's not a pride issue, you pick up the phone, you call us and say you screwed up here or whatever. We can work through it. So please be part of that. So lastly, I just want to again thank you and commend you all. To be committed to professional development takes a special person, and I recognize that. So thank you for giving a couple of days of your time too, just to be here on the sake of our students. So again, thank you, and please be in contact with us. Thanks.